Welcome to another episode of Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here at the News Forum, where all voices matter. One thing affecting regular Canadians from coast to coast is the eye-watering cost of filling your gas tank. Here to help us understand is the Honourable Dan McTeague. He is a former member of Parliament and an expert on gas prices. He's the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Welcome to Boom and Bust.
That's great to be here. Thanks, Tony.
My pleasure. So, Dan, where are we right now with the world market and domestic prices? Just give us a tour about what's going on right now with when it comes to gas prices and oil prices.
We'll start with gas prices. This time last year, average prices in Canada were about $1.30 a liter. This year, of course, pushing over $2 a liter. Now, of course, that may come down a little bit as a result of severe nervousness by many that we may be heading into a global recession, made possible by higher energy costs, made possible by inflation and the response by the Fed and other, other institutions, other central banks to the need to combat that inflation. But it looks like we're into very high sustained prices for the foreseeable future, both stateside and in Canada. The Canadian example is perhaps better known to all of us, not because we've experienced it, but because we've allowed a policy to develop in this nation that says no to fossil fuels, no to natural gas, no to oil, and therefore, to make sure that that happens, no to pipelines, and then regulation. All things you and I would have discussed over the years is probably improbable, but nevertheless attempted, implemented by the government. The world now finds itself short about 3 million barrels a day. Venezuela won't supply it. Iran can't supply it. Mexico can't supply it. The United States is 1.5 million barrels short. And of course, I don't think we want to ask Russia to do any more damage. So we're now in a very interesting position where the world is asking countries like Canada, with the third largest provable reserves in the world, could you spare us a couple of barrels or maybe a few cubic meters of natural gas? And the answer by Canadians' leadership, no. Well, the fact is, it's only hurting Canadians. It's driving up inflation, reducing the value of the Canadian dollar dramatically. When you were in Parliament and I was in Parliament, we always had the advantage of the petroloonie. We no longer have that. And so we have a very serious situation on our hands.
And I'm going to unpack all of that. Don't you worry. But I do want to come back to one question. Why are prices so high right now? We hit these world prices before, and then gas was $1 a liter less expensive. So walk us through that again.
Well, we had the petrodollar, of course, where every commodity in this country is priced in U.S. terms. Right now, it takes 130 pennies to buy U.S. dollars. So that means we've lost the equivalent of about a third of our purchase power. So that actually adds 36 cents a liter to the price of gasoline. And that is very much the policy and the fault of the federal government, not provinces or outside external forces. I mentioned earlier, we have a very large amount of reserve. We've chosen not to deploy it or use it. Then we have taxes, carbon taxes. Now, 12.5 cents a liter in places like my province of Ontario, if you add the HST, and of course, other taxes have been introduced over the years. But the primary thrust of all of this is not a demand issue. It is very much a supply issue. And Canada, I can't be emphatic enough. Canada has refused to provide additional barrels to the world. It's embarrassing, actually, because I know that our ministers are heading to other countries around the world, especially Europeans, and they're scratching their heads saying, what's wrong with your country? Why won't you go down this road? And please don't follow us in terms of what we've done in terms of the trillions of dollars we've invested in renewables that don't work.
And so you're saying this is an actual government of Canada policy to not
it is very much.
To keep it in the ground.
It is the direct result of the Canadian government's position, supported by the NDP, supported by the Greens, and to a large extent, the Bloc Québécois especially, to say no. No, we don't need to produce this, and we want net zero. And no, we don't just want net zero, we just want absolute zero. And be very careful in terms of what I'm saying here. The government isn't going to stop and say, all right, because we can balance off, a carbon credit here or there and pay for it, and the public's going to wind up being poorer for this. We don't want any carbon produced in this country, and as a result, we've faulted ourselves. It is a government of Canada policy to destroy and get rid of the hydrocarbon sector, oil and gas. However, reality, I think, globally, internally, domestically, and price is speaking very differently than that language. And I think we're going to be looking at a rather tectonic shift in the public narrative in this country in the next several months.
We're going to continue our discussion with Dan McTeague. He is the president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. We're going to come back after the break. There's lots to discuss. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here. The Honourable Dan McTeague. He is president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Dan, want to unpack something we talked about in the first segment a little bit more, and that's the effect of government taxation, tax hikes in the oil and gas sector and on gasoline at the pump. Now, some are advocating that we lower those taxes or have a tax suspension. But there's always this pushback saying, well, as soon as you suspend the tax, the oil companies will scoop up that amount of money and it won't affect price. So I'd love to get your understanding of what's going on those issues.
There probably was a time when that might and could have happened because there was no transparency on the breakdown pricing. But I think, as you well know, as do I, over the years, we've developed the ability to predict prices. So we know exactly to the 10th of a cent who's making what on that liter of gasoline. So if a province were to, for instance, like Alberta, drop gasoline taxes 13 cents plus 5% GST or 13.6 cents a liter, it stands to reason that you would expect a 13-cent decrease. And that's precisely what happened in the case of Alberta. There are provinces, however, where I'm sure that is the temptation to say so, but I think they need to modernize their thought, the internet, the ability for, I've got 36,000 on Twitter, gaswizard.ca, the site I run, another, 25,000 per day coming onto that, Canadians for Affordable Energy. So all these inquiries it'd be very quick to call that kind of behavior offside, and you'd find out who is doing it very quickly. So I doubt it can happen this modern age.
Okay, no, that's good to know. Obviously, another thing that's happening overseas is in the UK. They want to cap oil company profits. Would that or would that not work?
Well, you're going to simply drive them to another jurisdiction where they aren't. And what are you really trying to cap? Because if companies making money post-pandemic is the issue, then I'd suggest you may want to start with other industries, including technology, your Amazons, your Apples, your Teslas, take your pick. There's, making profit is not a bad word, but in the context of 3 or 4 years of absolute losses, in the case of the Canadian energy sector, having lost money since 2014 when Saudi Arabia decided to flood the world with oil, and the Americans began the process of fracking and started turning their backs on Canadian product, even though they needed it desperately. I don't think it's a very wise thing to do. And of course, you would simply drive out investments, what little is left in Canada. I just hope people know that if that were to happen, then how are you going to pay for your hospitals and your roads? Better yet, you're making 20, 30 billion bucks a year in net revenues from this government, all three levels of ordinance in this country. So I would say, good luck doing that. You would be cutting your nose off, literally, to spite your face.
Now, you've recently written about the changes of attitude that you're seeing in the Canadian public. And I want to unpack this for a little while. Specifically, you've been writing about it, the province of Quebec, where Quebecers were notorious about not wanting more pipelines and opposing pipelines and really setting up a wall to make sure pipelines didn't happen in their territory. Tell us what you're seeing now.
Well, a Leger poll conducted in May, and yes, for the Montreal Institute, came out something rather startling and revealing. Well, there are over 2,000 people in Quebec were interviewed, and the numbers demonstrate that there has been a significant shift in public views, such that I think the idea that we can cancel pipelines, as Quebec took the position, and not allow pipelines to go through based on social license no longer exists. It appears society has changed, and therefore the license to build pipelines is very much at hand. The facts that came out were, of course, that 86% of people are concerned about the price, 76% concerned that taxes are driving that. And in the case of Montreal and Quebec, about 46 to 40 in favor of building pipelines coming from Western Canada through their province, whether it's terminated in Montreal or Quebec. The numbers were, rather insignificant, but it does demonstrate that there is a dramatic sea lane change in the way in which Quebec perceives hydrocarbons, it also is looking for more development of its hydrocarbons, its own natural gas. So there's opportunities there. We've always said Quebec doesn't want it. I think it's time to renew our thought and perhaps have a relook at that, because I think politicians and those saying what happened 5 and 10 years ago exists today are out of touch.
We've got 30 seconds before the break. Do you think Francois Legault, the Premier of Quebec, will listen to that?
I think he's pragmatic. I think he also is aware that $2.15 a liter is impossible, and electric vehicles aren't going to cut the mustard in the middle of winter. Remember, Hydro-Quebec borrows more energy from Ontario in the winter than it does any other jurisdiction. So you kind of need that. We have natural gas here. I think Quebec's starting to get real.
We're going to return with our guest Dan McTeague after the break. Please stay with us. We'll be right back. Dan, again, another thing I want to unpack. You had so much information in that first segment. It's important that we get a little bit deeper in some of this stuff. So, we've been told as Canadians that it's important to transition away from non-renewables to renewables. Do you see that actually happening, or tell us your assessment of where that project is?
Well, I think it's happening, Tony. There are major breakthroughs in technologies and new developments, and Canada, of course, is as we say, French chef de file. Canada is a world leader in some of these new technologies. Now, of course, it's very much typical of the Canadian way that we don't celebrate them, but I would think that one of the major developments that we're seeing now isn't just in terms of sequestration, but also our ability to be responsible. In the sense, if everyone's using the test of environmental, social, and governance templates to prove the worthiness, current worthiness of an investment, then we've got the last two nailed down. The first one we're still working on. The emissions are coming down. I think this is important to understand, because people believe that the only way in which you're going to get this is for a bunch of politicians to get together and force companies to do that.
Right.
Look, it's going to happen. Jurisdictions like California are far more important than what the federal government can do. I think we have to avoid being trendy, but we also at the same time have to recognize that the world has alternatives, and the alternatives aren't as nice or as clean as Canada's.
Are electric vehicles the future then, do you see?
Okay, well, I'm bringing my own bias, being a former public relations guy for Toyota Lexus. No, I don't think they are. I still think hybrid is good, proven technology, and there are other things that will go beyond electric vehicles. The reliability, scalability, affordability of EVs make them a tough sell. More importantly, if you start to look at more rigorous environmental scrutiny, when you consider who controls the rare earth minerals, who controls the processing by which we do these things, no, I think they're a dud. And when you look at them from a life cycle perspective, the fact that you can't even recycle batteries, they're more damaging to the environment than current efficient internal combustion engines. And it's not bias. I think it's proven fact.
Yeah, no, that's an interesting point, because certainly when you look at it like from a holistic approach, there's a lot involved with the electric vehicles that does put a strain on the environment. The mining of those rare earth elements or critical minerals, for instance, and not every jurisdiction has a pristine place from which to get the electricity to power the machine. And that's the kind of thing that you're concerned about.
I am. And as to add to that, subsidies are the only way to attract people to buy them. Subsidies in order to get companies to build them. Subsidies to build charging stations. At what point does this make economic sense? Because it certainly doesn't make environmental sense at this stage. Maybe in years to come. Canada's role has always been to find a variety of options, not one versus the other. So 2030, all ICE vehicles off the road is insane, and it's irresponsible. And those promoting it know full well that it's only about the green in their pockets, not the green that they're trying to pursue.
So that goal is unattainable, do you think?
Very unattainable and unrealistic. Anybody who lives in this country from November to March knows how bad it could be here. In fact, a week and a half ago here in Ontario, many people turned on their thermostats. So, look, I drive a hybrid. No sense of bias there. In the winter, the mileage drops dramatically. Right. They cannot hold their charge, and no amount of storage yet made available technologically can do that. So I think it's still pipe dream. long way off. In the meantime, we're doing untold damage by assuming that we can simply, through some form of political demagoguery, do what science has not been able to do.
And we're also in an age where obviously the war by Russia on Ukraine is having a huge disruptive impact on world markets, right? So do you think that President Biden's looking to Saudi Arabia to be the savior, and how does that mesh with plans to get to electric vehicles?
I think he's looking pathetic. I mean, the first day of office is he slapped Canada right in the face with a 80% built Keystone XL pipeline, which Americans want, which Americans need, and would have easily displaced the 800,000 barrels a day California was importing from Russia, and in no small way abetting Russia's designs. I believe it's embarrassing for the president to go to Venezuela to try to find some way around the Iranian nuclear issue, and now on bended knee up against a regime in Saudi Arabia that he has criticized, and rightfully, by the way. But at the same time, this is the optics on this are terrible, and it demonstrates that his own country used to produce 13.1 million barrels a day pre-pandemic, now down to 11.8. The problem lies in the United States and with the Biden administration.
We're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with our guest, Dan McTeague. After that break, please stay with us. Welcome back to Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, here with Dan McTeague. He is a former member of Parliament. We sat in the House of Commons together, and now he is president of Canadians for Affordable Energy. Dan, I want to bring it back to Canada. We sort of went around the world a little bit there. But obviously, the current government seems to have its set of solutions. And I'd just like to provide you with the opportunity to say what you think is good and say what you think isn't so good in terms of their sets of solutions on the energy issues.
I think they're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I think they're completely detached from reality, and I think a growing number of Canadians realize that. I think we all want to aspire to a cleaner, brighter future, but to somehow take a mallet to the most important industry that provides not only clean energy, but also, most importantly, sustains our economy is absolutely mind-boggling and reckless. But that aside, I mean, you and I sat on opposite sides of the House. We may have had different different views on how to proceed this industry, but neither of us ever concluded that we should get rid of this industry. Quite to the contrary, it's going to be around for a long time. We need to nurture and support our energy sector. They're not friends of mine. As you know, I did battle with them many, many times, and they love the fact that I predict prices, denies them tens of millions of dollars every year. At the end of this, though, we need fossil fuels. We need hydrocarbons. It's the way of the future, like it or not.
Yeah. Do you get a sense, we talked a little bit about the Quebec public opinion. Is that something that you sense in Ontario as well, that there's a turning of the mind on these kinds of issues?
Well, I would have had a bit of a chuckle on this years ago and said, if Quebec starts to turn, so does Ontario. I knew that in 2011, when Quebec started to turn in favor of Jack Layton, I wound up without a job in 2011. But Ontario doesn't necessarily follow. But I think Ontarians have been, have been down this road before of green energy, and they see the doubling, the tripling, the price of the hydro. The same group of people around in 2010 who brought that terrible 20, 30 years of prohibitive prices, the province of Ontario having to take $6.5 billion in debt every year just to defray the cost of energy, knowing that these same people now run the show in Ottawa. I think people are starting to become rather displeased. And I think that's probably a very mild word. I would not for a second interpret what happened in the province of Ontario as being somehow detached from what is likely to happen in Ottawa. And I sense that even from my many friends, many of them liberals, who are sick and tired of this particular regime.
Yeah, and the other one is, of course, Line 5. We've had a number of guests on my program here at Boom and Bust talking about Line 5,
Yes.
the Michigan underwater pipeline. And, if that were ever to be shut off by the Michigander governor,
Yeah.
people would notice that right away, wouldn't they?
Well, if Dana Nessel and Governor Gretchen Whitmer get their way, yes. But I warned this was going to happen in 2016, 2017. People like the Canadian press didn't think it was a big deal. We're coming at this very late, and we tend to give the wrong signals. On the one hand, we're saying stop fossil fuels, but no, the Americans have to continue to supply us through their land, the oil that we desperately need to keep our economy going, oil, propane, natural gas, et cetera. So I think we have to be very clear in our messaging, and we can't do that with a government that's basically said no more fossil fuels in the next 30 years.
We've got just over a minute left. Since you're the great predictor, I've got to ask you, what are your predictions coming up? What do you see happening?
It's going to be it's going to be more affordable for the next couple of weeks. But come July and August, look for us to break back through prices, average in Canada about $2.20 a litre. We're not out of this yet. We're not going to be out for a long period of time.
Do you think that an increase in global supply is happening anytime soon?
No, although I think there's an incentive for that to happen, but no one's got spare barrels. Let's not kid ourselves. OPEC is not in a position where it can provide much more oil. Russia can continue to sell it in the back channels to India and China. But the issue here, there are three main routes: OPEC to Asia, Russia to Europe, and the third one, which is the most vulnerable one, is North America, Canada, United States, and back and forth.
Right.
That relationship has been disrupted, and that's one of the main reasons why we're paying $110, $120 a barrel, not $50, $60 a barrel, which is where we should be if Canadians were allowed to build pipelines in this country.
Dan McTeague, it's always a pleasure chatting with you. You always have a lot of insights. Thanks for joining Boom and Bust today, and keep doing what you're doing. It's very important for our country.
You got it. Thanks for having me, Tony. Appreciate
Thank you.
this.
That was Dan McTeague, obviously an expert on gas prices at the pump and the oil market more generally around the world. Very interesting insights about what's wrong with Canadian oil and gas policy, energy policy, and what needs to be done. But I hope you enjoyed that, and thanks for watching again.